Hey listener, you're on the channel where we talk about betrayal, drama, and the kind of choices that can destroy or save a life. So if you're new here, I hit subscribe, tap a like because it's helped the channel more than you imagine. And now turn the volume up because what I'm about to tell you doesn't involve ghosts or monsters, but it's still one of the coldest horror I've ever lived through. The day my only dollar tried to steal my entire life.
My name is Robert Hayes. I'm in my early 60s, and I'm the kind of man who built his world one careful brick at a time. Modest home, quiet street, no drama. After a long career in a legal office, I settled into a part-time job at the local library, thinking my biggest problems would be back pain, rising heating bills, and whether my old boiler would survive one more winter. I also owned one extra property, a small rental across town. Nothing fancy, just a simple house I leased long-term to an older couple. That rental was my safety net. It paid a steady monthly income, the kind that lets you sleep at night when you're getting older. My daughter, Emily, was the opposite of me. Always hungry, always climbing. Promotions, titles, status, the kind of shiny life you can't touch but everyone can see. Her mother died when Emily was 12, and from that day on, it was just the two of us. I raised her alone. I worked 2 jobs. I skipped holidays. I cut corners on myself so she could have every chance. I told myself those sacrifices would come back as love. Respect. Loyalty. That's the lie parents tell themselves when they're too tired to see the warning signs. Last winter, I got hit with a brutal pneumonia that nearly finished me. I remember the hospital room like a foggy nightmare. Fluorescent lights. Dry mouth, tubes in my arm, fever dreams. Emily visited every day, sweet as sugar, and one afternoon she brought a stack of papers. She said they were routine forms and insurance updates. I was barely coherent. I signed where she pointed because she was my daughter and I trusted her, because the idea of my own child setting a trap while I struggled to breathe didn't fit in my brain. I survived that illness. I walked back into my house and told myself the worst was behind me. I was wrong. 3 months before everything collapsed, Emily asked for the details of my bank accounts. She said she wanted to set up automatic payments and online access, so I wouldn't have to worry about bills. She talked about safety, convenience. Dad, you shouldn't be stressing over passwords and due dates, she told me, like she was doing me a favor. I hesitated. Something in my gut tightened, but I ignored it. Because that's what people like me do. We swallow fear and call it paranoia. I gave her the information and told myself it was normal for a daughter to help her aging father. A few weeks later, she came by with her fiancé, Adam. He was handsome in a polished, expensive way. New shoes, white teeth, perfect hair, and a smile that never reached his eyes. While Emily made coffee in my little kitchen, Adam stood in my living room and let his gaze crawl over everything. The shelves, the corners, the walls. He didn't look at my home like a place where someone lived. He looked at it like an item on a spreadsheet. This place must be worth a lot now, Robert, he said, like we were discussing a product. Real estate around here has gone crazy. He didn't call me Dad. Not once. I told him, calmly, that it was my home and I had no intention of selling. Emily laughed and squeezed his hand, acting like he was just making conversation. But Adam's eyes didn't laugh. They measured. They calculated. And my stomach flipped because a part of me understood something my heart didn't want to accept. They weren't talking about my future. They were talking about what they could take. The real shock hit on a Sunday afternoon in late autumn. I checked my online banking, more out of habit than worry, and my heart simply stopped. My savings account, the one I'd built for decades, the one that held my retirement cushion and my late wife's insurance money, the one that used to sit around 124,000 euros, now showed just over 1,000. My checking account looked like it had been scraped clean with a knife. A few coins left, not enough for groceries and pride at the same time. My hand shook so hard I almost dropped the phone when I called the bank. The representative sounded polite and distant, like she was reading weather. She told me several large transfers had been made through my online portal to an account in the name of Emily Hayes. According to their records, the transfers were authorized with my login. I hung up and sat staring at the wall. The betrayal didn't arrive in one punch. It crawled through me. Slow. Poisonous. Like cold water seeping into your clothes before you realize you're drowning. The next morning my phone rang and Emily's voice burst into my ear like nothing was wrong. Dad, I've got amazing news. I'm getting married tomorrow. She sounded excited, almost breathless. Then she said it casual, cheerful, like she was asking to borrow a sweater. I used the money from your account for the wedding and our new start, but don't worry, you'll be fine on your pension. My mouth went dry. My throat tightened. Before I could even form a full sentence, she continued. Oh, and I sold the house too. Those hospital papers you signed gave me power to handle things. You have about 30 days to move out, okay? I have to run. The caterer's calling. Love you. Bye. For a second, the world tilted. You sold my house. I managed, but she was already talking over me, telling me the sale was around 328,000 euros, and it would help them buy an apartment in the city. Then she hung up, like she told me the time. I sat with the phone in my hand and felt something inside me crack. Not just my trust, something deeper, something that had carried me through decades of sacrifice. And then, slowly, something else slid into place. Something colder, sharper, because Emily didn't understand the difference between what she thought she owned and what I had actually protected. Here's the truth she never bothered to learn. The house I lived in, my real home, was held inside a family trust created years ago, tied to my late wife's side of the family. It was paid off, legally insulated, and structured in a way Emily had never cared to ask about. The property she managed to sell wasn't my home. It was my rental across town, the one with tenants, the one with a valid long-term lease still running. On paper, she hadn't sold her child at home. She'd sold a leased property she didn't truly have the right to sell, and she'd sold it to buyers who expected to move in. That meant only one thing, a legal minefield. The buyers would discover they couldn't take possession. The tenants were protected. The transaction would explode, and the blast radius would land on Emily. But knowing that didn't erase the pain. My savings were still gone. The trust between father and daughter had been gutted and left bleeding on the floor. So, I forced myself to stop thinking like a broken parent and start thinking like the paralegal I used to be. I asked myself one question. What can I prove, and what can I protect? I opened the locked metal box where I kept documents and pulled out the folder with the lease, the trust paperwork, the deeds, the copies I never threw away because I never trusted the world to stay kind. I wrote a list in a notebook. Report the theft. Contact the bank's fraud department. Call a lawyer. Notify the title company involved in the sale. Warn the tenants. Gather every shred of evidence, because the truth doesn't matter unless you can drag it into the light and pin it down. Then the question I didn't want to face rose up like a taste of ash. Was I really prepared to send my own daughter to prison? Despite everything, she was still the little girl I walked to school in the rain. The teenager I comforted after nightmares. The young woman I cheered for our graduation. But then her voice replayed in my head, bright and careless. You'll be fine on your pension. As if my life's work was a spare coin jar. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor and friend Karen, a retired paralegal with a sharp mind and a sharper spine. She noticed a sold sign on the rental property and wanted to know if everything was okay. I stared at her message for a long moment, then typed, long story. Coffee tomorrow. I knew I'd need allies, because schemes like this thrive when the victim is isolated and ashamed. The next morning, at 9 sharp, I called the bank's fraud line and requested printed statements for the last 6 months of every account. I asked for IP logs, look in histories, transfer authorizations, everything. Then I called Mark Ellison, a real estate attorney I knew through my book club. Mark, I said, voice tight, my daughter emptied my savings and sold a property using documents I didn't knowingly authorize. I need help. When I told him the amounts, about 124,000 euros drained from my accounts and a property sale around 328,000, he went quiet for a second, then swore under his breath and told me to come in that afternoon. I arrived carrying folders like bricks. Mark reviewed everything line by line. I watched his expression change from disbelief to anger. Robert, he said finally, this isn't family drama. It's theft. It's fraud. If the document is forged, it's forgery too. And if she used your illness to get signatures, that's an aggravating factor. I told him I wanted every option on the table. We drafted letters to the bank and the title company. We prepared a detailed police report. And I made one decision right there in his office. I would no longer protect Emily from consequences by hiding the truth. That evening, Karen came over with a bottle of wine and a face like a storm. I told her everything. She didn't soften it. She didn't say, maybe she didn't mean it. She said what I needed to hear. She did this on purpose. Robert. With Karen's help, I contacted my tenants, Helen and David Harris, the older couple living in the rental. They were stunned. David's voice trembled when he asked, "What happens to our lease?" I told him the lease was valid and we would fight to protect them. They promised to cooperate, testify, and provide records. The next day, the title company sent an email that changed the entire case from messy to damning. Their internal review found major irregularities. The power of attorney document used for the sale carried my signature. Yes, but the notarization stamp belonged to a notary whose license had expired. Worse, official logs showed that notary was documented working in another region on the date listed. In plain language, the notarization was almost certainly fake. The title company froze the remaining sale proceeds immediately, notified the buyers, and confirmed they were treating the sale as fraudulent while cooperating with law enforcement. I forwarded everything to Mark, and for the first time since this started, I felt something close to relief. Not because it was over, but because the trap Emily set for me was now snapping shut around her. Emily called that afternoon, voice high and sharp, panic bleeding through her anger. "Dad, the bank is calling me about a fraud investigation. Fix it. Tell them it's a mistake." I asked her, very calmly, if she truly believed draining my life savings was okay. She said she had borrowed it. She said she and Adam would pay me back. Then she leaned on the same excuse again, the hospital papers. "You signed it," she insisted. Like that ended the conversation. The memory made my skin go cold. I remembered the fever, the haze, her finger tapping the lines, her voice saying, "Just sign, Dad." I realized then that I hadn't raised a careless woman who made a mistake. I had raised someone who could look at her father's weakness and see an opportunity. "I never knowingly gave you authority to sell anything," I told her. "If you want this to stop, undo what you did." She snapped that everything was legal, that I was overreacting, that I was ruining her wedding with my drama. When I refused to call the bank and shut it down, she hung up on me like I was a stranger. The day before the wedding she called again, softer now, almost pleading. "Dad, I want you there tomorrow," she said. "Come in. Smile. Be happy for me. Everything will work out." I understood what she was really doing. She wasn't apologizing. She was managing optics. She wanted photos. She wanted proof that her father supported her. So if the story exploded, she could point at those images and call me confused. I told her I would attend. Not because I forgave her, because I wanted to see, with my own eyes, exactly what kind of people I was dealing with. The wedding was expensive and sterile, like a luxury catalog pretending to be love. A country club dressed in white roses. Guests in designer outfits. Smiles like masks. Adam stood tall in a suit that probably cost more than my first car, and he looked proud in the way someone looks when they believe they've won. When Emily saw me, she ran over and hugged me hard for the cameras. "You came," she whispered, radiant. "I knew you wouldn't stay mad. This is a new beginning." Adam shook my hand and made a thin comment about how change is hard for older people, but they were taking care of things now. I sat through the vows feeling detached, like I was watching actors perform a script they didn't fully understand. During the reception, while they cut the cake and posed for photos, my phone buzzed with a message from Mark. Police investigation opened. Bank and title company cooperating. Charges are being prepared. I looked across the room at my daughter laughing, completely unaware, and I felt a strange calm. Not today, I thought. Let the consequences arrive in their own time. 3 days after the wedding, They finally came to my door. Emily and Adam barged into my house, faces red with rage. "What the hell did you do?" Emily shouted. "The title company froze the money. The buyers are threatening to sue. They're saying the paperwork is fake." I told her the truth, simple and sharp. The power of attorney was invalid. The notarization looked forged. I had a lawyer. I had a police report. Adam stepped forward, voice cruel now, mask on. He said they were helping me because I was clearly too old to manage finances. He said everything I should go to Emily eventually anyway. Then he went further. He threatened to tell people I had dementia. He threatened to have me declared incompetent. He suggested a care home. He suggested control. That was the moment my hesitation died. "Get out of my house," I said. Quiet. Flat. When they refused, I counted to 5 and reached for my phone to call the police. They stormed out, swearing they'd make my life miserable. The next morning I called Mark and told him there would be no more delay. No more guilt. No more, but she's my daughter. I wanted every charge pursued as far as the law would take it. A week later, Emily called again, voice small, shaking. She said she was sorry. She blamed Adam. She said stress had made her act stupid. She begged me to drop the criminal case because a record would destroy her career. For a second, the image of her as a child flickered in my chest like a weak flame. Then I pictured my empty accounts. I pictured her laughing about my pension. I gave her terms. Full repayment within 30 days. Every cent plus interest. A signed confession. A written apology to the tenants and the buyers. She said it was impossible. I told her she should have thought about that before forging her way through my life. When she called me heartless, I asked her one question. How was it not heartless when you did it to me? Then I ended the call. Adam showed up alone after that, dressed in a light suit and a practiced expression of concern. He wanted to talk man to man. He tried to frame it as love, as saving Emily's future, as my duty as a father. When he realized I wouldn't bend, he snapped. He told me I'd die alone. He told me I'd regret it. He told me blood was blood and I was breaking the family. I told him, calmly, that family isn't blood. Family is integrity. And my daughter broke that first. In the weeks that followed, Karen and friends from my book club became my anchor. They brought food. They sat with me. They listened while I admitted the truth that felt like swallowing glass. Winning this meant losing my daughter. One friend told me forgiveness without consequences is permission. Another said she'd seen the same story play out, and it always got worse when the victim backed down. I didn't feel heroic. I felt sick. But I kept moving because the alternative was being erased quietly by the people who should have protected me. 6 weeks later, the case reached court. Emily refused a plea deal. She truly believed she could cry her way out of it, that strangers would pick the loving daughter over the bitter old father. I wore a plain gray suit, the same one I had worn at her graduation, and I sat under cold courtroom lights while my life was displayed in exhibits and bank statements. Emily sat beside her attorney. Adam sat behind them, tense and watchful. The prosecutor laid out the timeline with calm precision. Transfers from my accounts into Emily's account, digital access patterns, title records, lease documentation, and the notary irregularities that pointed to forgery. The defense strategy was exactly what Adam had threatened. They tried to paint me as confused, lonely, technologically inept, easily influenced by overprotective friends. They hinted at cognitive decline without proof. They suggested I had verbally authorized the transfers and later regretted it. When I took the stand, I kept my answers short and steady. I told the court I had never authorized my daughter to drain my life savings. I told them I had never knowingly granted her power to sell property. I described a pneumonia hospitalization, the fog, the stack of papers framed as routine. I told them I was not perfect, but I was not confused about whether I had given my child permission to destroy me. Emily testified too. Under her lawyer's questions, she performed the role of devoted daughter. She claimed I begged her to handle my finances. She claimed I wanted to help fund her wedding. She claimed I understood exactly what I signed. To someone who didn't know her, it might have sounded convincing until the prosecutor asked for proof. Any email, any text, any letter, anything showing my consent. There was nothing. Then came the notary issue. The prosecutor asked how a notary with an expired license could have lawfully stamped the document, and how records placed that notary in a different region on the exact date. Emily stammered about clerical errors. The prosecutor asked why the buyers were never told about the tenants and the lease. Emily said she assumed the agent handled it. Contradiction stacked on contradiction. Her story cracked. The jury could see it. When deliberations ended, the courtroom went silent. Guilty on aggravated theft. Guilty on fraud. Guilty on forgery. Each word landed like a door slamming. Emily's face collapsed. Adam made a strangled noise behind her. The judge set sentencing for 6 weeks later, and Emily left on strict conditions with her passport confiscated and her world shrinking around her. Sentencing was harder than the verdict. Victims spoke. The tenants, Helen and David Harris, described sleepless nights, panic, and the fear of being pushed out of the home they had lived in for years. The buyers described loans, drained savings, and the stress of realizing they had bought a legal disaster. It was my turn. I told the court the truth no father wants to say out loud. Then my daughter looked at me and saw not a parent, but a resource. That I lay awake at night wondering where I had failed. That I imagined my late wife watching this and feeling heartbreak beyond words. When I finished, the judge listened without softness. She said this wasn't one impulsive mistake. It was a series of deliberate acts driven by entitlement and greed. She said the exploitation of illness and the threats afterward made it worse, not better. Then she delivered the sentence. 7 years in prison, eligibility for parole only after at least 4 years served, and restitution totaling about 212,000 euros, covering what had been stolen from my accounts, documented damages and costs caused to the tenants and buyers, and penalties and court costs. The attempted property sale itself unraveled under investigation, funds were frozen, transactions reversed where possible, but the harm was real, and the court treated it that way. When Emily was led away in handcuffs, she turned and looked at me one last time, eyes swollen, begging for a forgiveness she had never asked for before the consequences arrived. I met her gaze, steady and silent. There was nothing left to say. Afterward, Mark explained the practical side. Emily and Adam's assets were frozen. The apartment they rushed to buy with stolen money would be sold under court order. Bank accounts would be seized. Wages could be garnished. Even if Adam avoided criminal charges, civil liability would follow him as long as money and benefit could be traced. A few weeks later, I received the first restitution payment, around 14,000 euros, pulled from what was recovered through the for-sale process. It wasn't everything. It wasn't even close. But it proved the system could still work when you refused to be silent. Over the following months, Emily's glossy life evaporated. She lost her job in finance almost immediately. Professional doors slammed shut. Friends disappeared. The curated photos went dark. Adam filed for divorce before a year passed, claiming he'd been misled, as if he hadn't helped steer the knife. Meanwhile, my world, strangely, began to grow again. The Harrisons sent me a handwritten card with flowers, thanking me for protecting them. Karen organized a small dinner with her closest friends. They raised a quiet toast, not to revenge, but to resilience. And I admitted something that surprised even me. Winning didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. Because yes, I won in court, but I lost my daughter. The little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest during thunderstorms was gone. In her place was a woman I didn't recognize. Still, I reclaimed something that mattered. My dignity. My boundaries. The knowledge that love without respect is a trap. About 6 months after sentencing, I found a purpose I didn't expect. I used my legal background and my experience to start a small consultancy, helping older people protect themselves from financial abuse. Karen joined me. We held workshops at community centers. We taught people how to set up protections, how to recognize red flags, how to say no, even when the pressure comes from family. Each person I helped felt like a small piece of redemption, like turning poison into medicine. Time passed. 7 years passed. I won't pretend I didn't hear things through lawyers and distant relatives. Prison is not a lesson you learn gently. Emily struggled. She suffered. Her parole requests were denied more than once because she had no stable plan, no support, no credible path forward. In the end, she served the full sentence. When she walks out, the world she knew will be gone. Her career is over. Her reputation is ash. The debt will still follow her. People sometimes ask if I feel guilty. The truth is complicated. I can see my part in it. I love my daughter so completely that I forgot to teach her the one lesson love must carry: respect. I gave and gave and gave without boundaries. And in doing so, I helped raise someone who believed she was entitled to take. The hardest lesson I've learned is simple and brutal. Love without respect is worthless, and family without integrity means nothing. Sometimes, the most painful choice, standing up to your own child, is the only right one. My daughter didn't end up in prison because I was vindictive. She ended up there because she chose greed over love, lies over truth, and exploitation over decency. So let me ask you, because this is where my story touches yours, what would you do if your own child betrayed you like this? Would you choose justice over guilt? Would you protect yourself, even while your heart is breaking? Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story hit you, tap like, tell me in the comments what part hit you the hardest and what you would have done in my place. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because more stories are on the way and mine, believe me, isn't over yet.